I guess it's that aspect is it's personality based as well in terms of trying to be thorough as well, but it's also the approach that I have had to take in with my work.
Mm.
Um, in my line of work, the details really matter, and you absolutely have to know your rules and that kind of stuff, and it's super important to be very accurate with notes and that kind of stuff. So you do a lot of study and that sort of. So I guess it's an on-flow from my professional career.
All right, well, let's jump forward quite a bit in time. We've gone from about 2006 now to 2014. So
Mm,
I'm sure there was many other interesting stories from back in the day, Mike. But I think
yeah.
where your career, at least, is most interesting to me, and perhaps more interesting to the more quote unquote modern viewers, I suppose we call them in this context. I don't know. I couldn't really think of a better way of saying it.
Sure.
Is when you started casting Counter Strike Global Offensive, right? So this
Mm,
is, I think I mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me like you sort of departed Counter Strike a little bit. You sort of got out
yeah.
of Counter Strike and maybe even gaming in general. And then there was this
Yes.
this sort of call back to action in a way once Counter Strike Global Offensive came back around.
Yeah. So probably late 2006, early 2007, I got out of Counter Strike. Yeah, I didn't particularly have the drive to play Counter Strike, which is why I initially quit 1.6, is because I didn't really kind of want to play that much. And then somehow got dragged into Source, and then was one of the top players in Australia in Source. So then I just kind of played it because I was good. Um, and I would legitimately, because of my 1.6 experience, was one of the best players in Source in the early days. And this is like pre-sponge kind of days, very early kind of days. But after the Nationals, where we placed seventh or something as psychotic in WCG quals that year, um, then I basically stopped playing seriously after that. I played for a few teams, and then I was getting kind of really big into DJing at the time as well, and I kind of just threw more energy into that. And then, like, I met my wife, my now wife, a year or so later or so, and then kind of got myself organized life wise because I hadn't had a career at all at that point. And I guess I was using esports in a lot of ways to just kind of like defer not knowing what I was going to do with my life.
Like many of us.
Yeah, pretty much. But I wasn't able to make a career and good money out of it at the time. So I had to go and get a real job,
Quote unquote.
real job,
Yep.
quote
A
unquote.
real life
Yeah.
job, yeah.
So yeah, I kind of fell out of the scene for a long time there, and then getting my real life career sorted out because I joined the Air Force and became an air traffic controller, and it's a pretty serious kind of job, and it's very intensive. I didn't really in the first few years where you start off, you have to learn quite a lot,
Mm.
and there is a lot of training involved. So I didn't really have the time to play gaming that much. I was playing a bit of Battlefield, casually, Battlefield Bad Company 2 and this and that. And then at some point, I checked out Counter Strike Go. And then I was like, hey, this is kind of fun. This is a pretty good version of Counter Strike. Certainly better than what I remembered as Source. And Source had its own kind of thing in terms of 1.6 versus Source, and that's probably a whole other conversation. And I thought, yeah, this is pretty good. And I thought, oh, maybe I could play this as well. I wouldn't mind playing like, maybe Div 2 kind of level. Playing competitively with a team is something that I always kind of enjoyed, and I get a lot of that kind of enjoyment as well in terms of my working together as a team with a few other people. Um, so then I was like, oh, maybe I'll just start playing again. So then I started playing again. The brain is there in terms of Counter Strike. I felt like I could understand the game. The game hasn't changed that much, but the aim wasn't as good. I wouldn't call myself ridiculously sharp back in the day, but I was a good rifler back in the day. Uh, so my aim wasn't as good as it used to be. I couldn't take the firefights and that kind of stuff. So then I kind of playing the game in terms of or thinking more about the game, and then I kind of looked at the scene. And again, thinking of that aspect that I had from my ESAU and Pantheon days in terms of doing coverage and writing articles and things like that, I looked at the game back then in sort of 2015, and there was like no kind of coverage going on outside of the streams for the events, and the streams for the events as well were fairly limited in terms of cast game, go to break.
Yep.
So, and that's not, it's just a maturity thing in terms of making those kind of production things happen as well. So basically at this point I kind of went, well, I really enjoyed doing this previously, and this is something that's clearly missing from the community. So I just kind of started making some content.
What kind of content was that you made?
So initially I did some demo analysis, which is basically me talking over a demo. I put it up on the CG forums and said, what do people think about it? There was like, hey, this is really good, but it's way too wrong, because it was like, 50 minutes of me analyzing a few rounds and that kind of stuff, which works for some people, right? Some people enjoy that. Most people don't.
Your casting career was very, I think it created a lot of opinions, right? So there was a lot of people that thought you were boring, or that you were maybe too long-winded or whatever. And then there was a lot of people that obviously enjoyed your content from the analytical perspective. And I think it just comes from two different kinds of people, right? And you seem like the kind of person that's very sort of driven and motivated as far as the analytical information is there. I know you, like, in your personal life, you're quite a studious person as well with your job and that kind of thing. At least that's the impression you gave me. So I think that's the
nice.
kind of thing that you sort of lean towards more so, whereas some people may not have leaned towards that quite as much, and they would have just wanted to, I don't know, watch a game of Counter Strike, for example, as opposed to really think necessarily about what's happening. So I want to ask you then, how did you actually get into casting? Because I guess from what I saw from you, it sort of seemed like you kind of just almost fell into it in a way. Like, I guess maybe from this analysis kind of stuff, something kind of happened.
Yeah, it is. So basically from this kind of point is, I started off doing those big kind of analysis things, and then I kind of tweaked the format a little bit. I got some feedback from Commando, I remember at one point, and some other people, hey, do this. And then people were like, hey, you should do like a news kind of thing. So I was doing like a weekly kind of update in terms of, just about what was happening in the Australian scene at the time. And then, of course, I started doing a few like podcasty things. I had Forge on pretty early, and eventually Wooly.
Mic check.
Mic check.
Still waiting for the royalties, by the way. That was my name.
Yeah, okay. They're in the mail, mate. I made a lot of money off it. I'll send it right to you.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the casting, so I guess like I was doing this analysis stuff, and then Commando was part of ACL at the time, and he's basically like, do you want to come and cast? And this isn't the first time I'd cast, actually. We missed this early on.
Yes,
so
we did.
we'll get back to that, I guess. But yeah, he's basically, do you want to come down to ACL Sydney and cast? And I was living in Newcastle at the time. So it was about a 2-hour drive. And I was like, sure, I'll come down for the day and do some casting. So I came down for the Sunday, the finals day for that, which is where I met you and Ben, and kind of did my first CSGO event there.
Yeah, so you had a bit of experience casting back in the day kind of thing, right?
Yeah, so so this is how Counter Strike 1.6 worked in terms of, national events and things like that. Me and another guy, Bizarre was his alias, Matt, we helped run the qualifier for WCG 2004 at a net cafe, and I happened to be sponsored by that net cafe for my playing aspect at the time, but we didn't qualify for the final, our team or something like that. And the net cafe owners gave Matt and I flights, like money for flights to go up to the nationals to try and, under the guise of kind of learn of how they run things to make our events better and that kind of stuff, and kind of represent the net cafe, because we would help out with a local land league that they would run regularly, that kind of stuff. And we're like, sweet, free flights, which made it affordable for us to go up. Then when we get there, and I zero recollection of how it actually occurred. At some point when we were chatting to the event organizers, they wanted someone to commentate for the game. And they'd set up, and this was at the ATP in Sydney, they'd set up one of the rooms with a big projector screen. And they were showing, the HLTV feed, like basically just copied off one of the, a computer that was connected to the server, and they're like, we want someone to commentate this. We didn't even call it casting, but it was called casting, but they didn't call it casting, and I didn't really know the term casting that well either. So it was me, and I don't even remember who I casted with, to be honest. And there is a video floating around on a 23, and this is the year that 23 beat F0 at WCG, which was a massive upset. And basically, I can't remember how I ended up going, but like, do you want to commentate this? And I was like, sure, why not? I'll do it. And that was my first casting. It was literally casting the finals of a national event. First time I even jumped on a mic. So
Actually, mine was similar. I did a nationals as my first cast in Counter Strike as well.
yeah,
Either way, you know obviously have
yeah.
that little bit of experience, but
Yep.
it's kind of a different ball game, right? Come Counter Strike Global Offensive, it's a bit more like legit.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely a lot more legit. I did a few other events. I remember I actually did some work, some paid work for those guys, commentating after the event, the demos that they were then recording, converting into
Oh,
videos
really?
to go on their website. Yeah. I did like 2 days in Sydney. So I got flown up to Sydney and cast like 6 hours solo over VODs, well, not VODs, demos.
Hmm.
Um, and their website never even got online. So well, I got paid, so I
Yeah,
don't
you
really
can't
know.
really
Yeah.
complain too much.
No, no, and paid gigs were just like ridiculously uncommon. You didn't get paid back in the day. No one was getting paid,
Hmm.
basically.
Um,
Um, and I did PES Nationals 2005 as well. I commentated a bit at that and maybe one or two other events. But yeah, so then yeah, when it comes around to sort of the CS:GO aspect, and particularly when the ACL guys got involved, we had a stage, we had proper production, people running production. It wasn't just the stream is on, the stream is off type thing. There's certainly a lot of more legitimacy to it.
yeah, so you come to ACL Sydney, right? And then you do a bit of casting there. You, I believe,
Yep.
interviewed Sponge as well prior to
Yes.
the grand final. So there's a lot going on here. I always wondered like what your mentality was toward commentary at that time, right? Presuming this was your first time doing Counter Strike Global Offensive commentary. I know from my perspective, I'd been doing casting for League of Legends a little bit prior, and so it was kind of a semi-serious thing for me. But for you, was it quite a serious thing? Did you take it quite seriously, or how did you sort of think about casting as a concept? Like, did you just want to do it as fun, or was it like,
Yeah, it was a hobby for me. I, it's a hobby with a very kind of serious mindset associated with it. It was clearly in it to produce as better quality content as I could, and out there. I wasn't just turning up just to be involved. I was turning up to try and to provide insight as best I could and provide my opinion where I thought I could add some value. And that was basically what I wanted to do with all my content early on is do something, get something out of it myself in terms of like personal development and enjoyment in that kind of hobby, but also try and provide some expertise in terms of understanding the game, which I thought I had, and just trying to provide something back into that kind of community effectively to kind of make it better, because I just kind of saw a gap when I first started in content, and I was just kind of hoping that maybe if I start, some other people get involved and we could do some cool stuff. And I never had the thought of like going to lots of events, and that wasn't ever the goal really, and never where it started. It just kind of snowballed into that from there.
right? So I have this anecdote from ACL Sydney 2015, which is again maybe part of the reason why I think you're such a sort of studious kind of person, is that while you were not casting one of the games, you were sitting in the crowd and you had like I don't know, a page, like a binder or whatever, and you were taking notes. And I was talking to a player at the time. I won't mention who it was. But this player was kind of taking the mickey out of you, sort of going like, look at that nerd over there taking notes and that kind of thing. And from my personal perspective, right, you yourself know that I'm a very heavy note taker, right?
Yeah.
So to me, this was like the most ludicrous thing. Like, why the fuck are you even saying this to me? Anyway, I just thought that was kind of ridiculous. I didn't really say it to him at the time. I was just like, yeah, sort of thing, But I that moment has always sort of stuck with me. So did you kind of consider yourself as maybe one of the people that started taking it a bit more seriously than some others had early on in Counter Strike Global Offensive, as far as commentary is concerned?
I guess it's that aspect is it's personality based as well in terms of trying to be thorough as well, but it's also the approach that I have had to take in with my work. In my line of work, the details really matter, and you absolutely have to know your rules and that kind of stuff, and it's super important to be very accurate with notes and that kind of stuff. So you do a lot of study and that. So I guess it's an on-flow from my professional career in kind of terms, in sort of preparation and being aware of what's going to happen. We do a lot of kind of planning, tactical planning when we work. So that's kind of sitting in that aspect and taking notes and all that kind of stuff is just the way that my brain processes the information, is able to form opinions and analysis from that. So yeah, taking notes and that kind of stuff, it wasn't necessarily like, this is how I can get an edge up on anybody else making content. It's more of this is how my brain processes the data so that I can actually talk about things and have the confidence to know that what I'm talking about is legitimate.
Yeah, something that I probably echo as well. Like the way that I learn and sort of consume information is that if I write it down, I recognize that I will remember it quite a lot
Mm.
better. Oftentimes, I'll
Yep.
write pages of notes in preparation for an event, and then come the event, I won't even need to look at the notes just because I've sort of put it to memory. Some people can do that just
Yeah.
by looking at stuff. Some people can do it by talking about it, whatever. But for me,
Yeah.
it's taking the notes and writing it down.
In terms of verbatim recall, I'm very good at it because I've had to do that quite a lot. But I sort of talk to myself if I'm going to specific, if I need specific figures or anything like that, or specific phrases. And to put into context, I had an exam once on my course when I was first starting my professional career, and we had a week to put this information into our head before we had this exam. We were measured on it verbatim. I had 45 A4 pages
Hmm.
of
Insane.
notes. Like, yeah, so 45 A4 pages. And I was able to get, I wasn't tested on all of that clearly, but I was in the high 90% in recall from that particular situation. So I can, through practice, have learned to be able to recite ridiculous amounts of information. And so there's key figures and things like that. And I'll do an auditory thing. So I'll just talk to myself about it. And then that way, talk it over and over and just put it into my memory that way. So it's certainly aspects of that I put into my preparation for events and things like that, as well as, we shared notes a lot for stuff like Crown and
Hmm.
things like that.
Well, interesting that you mentioned Crown because that would be the next discussion topic. Now, I think
Mm.
heading into sort of 2015, we did ACL Sydney, we did ACL Melbourne, we had done
Yep.
a few CGs as well, Cyber Gamer lands, and I think
Yep.
at that time is where you and I had sort of started to position ourselves as one of, if not the premier duo for Counter Strike commentary in Australia. So maybe you put that down to sort of your work ethic, the fact that I'd been casting a little bit prior to that as well, and had maybe a bit of an established name and a bit of a network there as well with some of the
Yeah.
tournament organizers. Whatever the case, we get invited to do this Crown Invitational tournament, which is, the first really big kind of tournament in Global Offensive, at least.
Yeah.
$55,000 USD as well.
This is the largest esports event, basically.
At that time, yeah,
Oh,
certainly.
yeah, comfortably.
And
Yeah.
then, you've got things like, Virtus Pro and Team Immunity coming down. You've got Crown involved, which is, a big casino here in Australia. So, what are your thoughts going into this event? Like, I presumed, again, like you said, this was more of a hobby kind of a thing, but now it's starting to be like, you know what, we're actually on TV. That's another aspect to this tournament that we didn't even mention. So it's kind of a big deal sort of a thing, right?
Yeah, it really kind of was. And again, at this point in time, I wasn't really thinking so much in sort of um, going into this event of like, oh, this is a really big deal, or anything like it. Basically what my thoughts was like I acknowledged that it was a big deal, but the way that again, to get confidence in that was to do a lot of preparation for it. So I mean, the things that the people don't know about is you and I would jump on and a couple of times a week in advance, and we would do casts, like offline casts. So we'd
Demos.
pick a random demos and go through things. And on top of that, we were doing, we had a shared notes thing, and we were writing down, analysis tidbits and things like that just to prepare. And I can't remember how much we prepared, but we would have used maybe like 15, 20% of the content, I reckon, that we actually prepared. And we did several hours of casting by memory as well. So again, in terms of this sort of being a really big event, I acknowledged, personally acknowledged that it was going to be big, and it was a really cool opportunity. I was just really kind of excited to be a part of it, and for the opportunity. And I thought it was really cool. But again, it was that process of putting in the work to try and be as prepared as I can, so that when we turned up, we weren't going to make fools of ourselves, and we were going to do this event justice as best we could with the experience we had at the time.
Yeah, and at the time, I think we actually did do it justice. Like, if you go back, you can find Reddit threads about this event, and people are like, wow, this cast is really, really good. And I don't say that to sort of big up myself or anything like that, although it may sound like it. Because I look back personally at that event, and I think, fucking hell, that casting was horrible. But at the time, it seemed like people kind of really didn't mind it all that much, which is quite funny, right? Because now, anytime I go and cast an international event, people are like, who the fuck is this guy? This guy's a shit caster. So, like, what have I done wrong in the last 5 years, where 5 years ago I was at my peak?
You lost your joy, buddy. That's what it is.
Must be. It must be, exactly. I've gone through a few in Counter Strike.
You have.
It would be interesting to see how we'd go on a cast. One thing that that's actually really cool, because I didn't even remember that we had done the you go.
I was going to say, before you go into that kind of point, do you remember the and this is I don't know whether Commander will care about me bringing it up or not.
I don't think so.
Do you remember they floated the idea, because we were kind of chatting, it was Ben as well was involved in this, and I think Wooly was involved in the conversation as well. He's like, what if they kind of showed us some pictures of the event, the venue and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, what if we did tuxedos?
Oh, I remember this because we were in the Palms, which was like this really nice.
That's going to be this. They're like, we'll do this real like classy tuxedo event, and we're all like, no. I remember Ben being staunchly against it.
Probably one of his better ideas.
How that would have played out, us rocking up in tuxedos.
I actually had to go and buy a suit for that event. Like, not a suit, but I had to buy a jacket. I didn't really have a good one. And so that's where I got my first jacket.
I remember actually the jacket that I wore was blue, but the lighting they set up was like purple or something like that. And my jacket went purple, and everyone thought it was crazy purple jacket. Yep. It was blue the whole time.
All the photos look purple. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's cool. I don't really care rocking a purple jacket. So.
YOLO. Anyway, I didn't even remember doing the demo casts prior to that, but yeah, now that you mention it, that's the kind of thing I think that like people weren't really doing back at that time, and like now you don't do it so much anymore either. You've got people sort of doing their bedroom casts online and casting ESEA games and that sort of thing. But back then, that was really the only way to practice. Because most people couldn't even stream. The internet wasn't that good back then either. So just a different sort of a period. What did you think about casting, or not necessarily casting with me, but more so working with Ben and Wooly at the time? Like, that was the crew, right?
Yeah, it was, and we, I worked with Wooly quite a bit in terms of, we did the Mic Check podcast, which we had several episodes, and we had some other things before that as well that we kind of worked together on in terms of podcasts and chatting about Counter Strike in Australia. So Wooly and I had a good kind of working relationship at the time. So it was really cool to be able to do that event with him and Ben as well, who I'd met at ACL Sydney originally. And he was always around, and we were always chatting about things. And Ben was really useful as well at times, because he reviewed or sat in on some of our demos as well that we were doing ahead of that event and gave us feedback, which was really good. So it was really cool working with that team. I really enjoyed that event in terms of hanging out with you guys, on a personal level, as well as the really good experience that the event was overall. And it was a great success, that event.
Yeah, for me, it kind of felt like we'd almost made it. Like that was the first event where I thought, actually, this is kind of legit.
Yeah, and that certainly was a feeling that you got as well. But it was also, for me, it was like, ride the high of the event. But then, like, are we going to necessarily get another event like this in Australia again? And yes and no. Clearly, yes, later on with IEM, but no in terms of the onflow from that.
Yeah, well, we did get a couple of them. In the end, you weren't involved in the likes of IEM Sydney, which is obviously what you are referring to.
Yeah.
But one sort of thing that came from that event was that we both went to China very soon after. Now, that's a whole different kettle of fish, right? But I almost feel like this was the peak of your commentary career, right? Crown Invitational and the Crossfire Stars 2015 Grand Finals. Now, I can recall how you had to sort of try to get into China to begin with, right? Because you live in Newcastle, and for anyone that doesn't know, who's never been to China before, everyone that goes to China from Australia needs to get a visa, and the visa center is in Sydney. So M1kest4r
consulate,
has to travel 2 hours to get to the consulate.
Yes, there was a whole bunch of stuff that I can't speak about in terms of getting that to happen, but basically, yeah. So I had to drive down to Sydney to put in my visa, but there was a lot of processes involved and some complications with my visa as well, getting to that point. So there was a lot of like, I'm not going to go, I am going to go, I'm not going to go, I am going to go for literally
Would have been a
to
couple of
the
weeks.
yeah, there was a few weeks. No, it was a shorter period than actually. It was about a. I think it was good for a week,
Mm.
and then it was not good for a week, and then I got effectively the go the night before we flew out. So, um, I think we flew out on like a I don't know, like a Tuesday, I feel, or a Wednesday or something. I can't remember exactly. Um, but I had to drive from Newcastle down to Sydney, and I had a friend, Dave, who's a really good friend of mine who lives in Sydney. I've known him all my life, literally. Pick up my visa and my passport for me during the day because I had to work and literally couldn't get to the consulate in time to get it. Picked it up for me, and then I drove down to Sydney after work that day. And so I like left at 7 in the evening, drove down 2 hours, and then drove back 2 hours to Newcastle, got into bed at like 11 or 12 or something like that. And then, well, no, I packed, I think, then, and then got up at 4:15 or 4 o'clock the next day. So I had like 4 hours sleep, um, to drive to Newcastle Airport to get on a plane, weirdly, to fly to Melbourne to pick up an international trip to Guangzhou. Yeah, so it was madness for me. Yeah, not fun.
Not
I
fun.
don't know whether you remember when I met up with you in China,
Mm.
at the airport. I was pretty tilted at the time.
I actually
I
don't
don't.
recall that. You seemed pretty okay to me.
Oh, do you remember sitting at the production check, like the sound check,
I
or
do remember that.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I was pretty tilted, like because I was on very little sleep at the time. So the other side of this is, I did have oh, I should be like 2-year-old at the time. Yeah, 2.5-year-old at the time. So
Very young.
sleep wasn't
Mm.
spectacular, and I also work shift work, so I was regularly switching between early and lates and things like that.
Yeah.
So my sleep overall was pretty bad, and then I had all this stress associated with trying to get a visa, um, and then eventually getting a visa, and then having to run down to Sydney and back. And yeah, so then when
And
I
then you're in
turned
China.
up, yeah, and then I don't sleep on planes,
Mm.
and so yeah, it was real bad by that point because I'd been up for a long time, and I was, yeah, pretty tilted. And we were like, there was no point in actually us being at that. We were literally just sitting in front of a camera doing nothing,
Yep.
and I was just like tilted out of my mind.
That was sort of my first experience with Chinese rehearsals, or
Yes.
Asian rehearsals in general. You go anywhere in Asia, rehearsals are always the same. You don't ever
Yep.
do anything there. They're just messing around with the stage, but you have to
Yep.
sit there and wait. Anyway, we did end up filming a vlog while we were there as
Mm.
well. I don't know where that is, whether it's on your YouTube channel. I think I have a copy of it on my computer. So
Yeah.
if I can find it, I will put a little link to it
I
in
have
this
a
YouTube
copy
video.
for you if you really want. I do have
Yeah.
a video copy of it.
I'm sure I'll be able to sort something out. And yeah, there'll
Yep.
be a link there, and have a quick look at that if you're interested. But that was my first international
Mm.
casting gig. I assume the same for you. Must have
Yeah,
been.
first casting international
Mm.
gig. Yeah.
So what was this like for you? You know, did you sort of think
It's
again
really
like,
cool.
hey,
Yeah.
I'm doing something that like I never really thought I was going to do that, right? So I assume the same for you.
Yeah, no, I had no idea, and the whole event came up pretty much out of nowhere. It was
Mm.
very late notice overall, which is why the visa problem was such a big deal as well. Yeah, and yeah, it was really cool. I didn't, again, because I had a full-time job, at like a full career going, at the time. This was never ever a way, like for you, for example, you weren't working full time
No,
at
I
that
was
point.
at
You're still
uni.
at Guff or uni. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're at uni and working part time at Guff or whatever, and that kind of stuff. So you didn't have a career. I had a career, a stable job, that pays well and all that kind of stuff going. So this was all a side hustle of sorts for me, and it wasn't about the money. It was just about the life experience and enjoyment as part of that. So I was pretty much like, oh, this is sweet. I mean, I could. If I got the opportunity to do this a couple of times a year, that would be amazing. But at the same time, I wasn't relying on it, and I wasn't, thinking I'd ever get that kind of access or anything like that. So Yeah, so it was just an awesome experience, basically, like staying in a five-star restaurant, and all that kind of stuff. It was, like the esports dream, I guess, at this point, because we're getting paid. We didn't have to spend any money over there. I didn't
No.
spend a cent until I got to the or a yen or whatever, until I got to the airport terminal to go back, and then I bought my daughter a panda.
Yeah, I took out $300 Australian and I didn't
Mm,
use it until like 3 or 4 years later, where I had continued to then go to these events and had
yeah.
found a way to spend my own money at them. So obviously, we do this big event, Crossfire Stars Grand Finals. It's a game that we've never cast before,
Mm,
but it is Counter Strike, more or less.
definitely. Yep.
So it's sort of a natural transition across. Very, very good fun, enjoyable event. We come
Yeah.
back, and that's 2015 done and dusted, and that's really like almost the end of like your casting career. You did a little bit more in 2016. There was
Mm,
some CGPLs and ANZ champs and such like that. I think you might have done the first season of ANZ champs with ESL Australia. I think was
yeah.
probably one of your last events.
Yeah, I think it might have been, yeah. Or no, I think the CGPL in April
Hmm.
might have been my last event. Yeah.
But something around that
Yeah.
time. So
Yeah.
was this like a kind of a conscious thing, right? Where you sort of felt like, okay, well, I've done, everything that I could really ever hope to do in casting. It's time to start thinking about, taking a bit more of a backseat or something like that.
Uh, not so much a conscious thought. I guess it was other life choices that kind of led me down this way to a large degree. So yeah, so I, I feel like it was around Aprilish or something like that, or maybe it was March was the last event I might have done, and I was still keen to do more events at that point, but uh, I had yeah, we had my son was due to be born that year in 2016 in June, so then. For those of you who aren't parents, like I had my daughter was 3 by then, and she was a pretty easy child for the most part. So I was able to, and in terms of having one child, you can manage to keep some things going pretty easily. And my wife would help me out a lot of these things, but I was able to fit, casting on a weeknight, or the other side of it was shift work as well, was allowed me to like I could get home in the afternoon and record something before my daughter had finished at daycare for the day, and then kind of fit things around a little bit easier. But when the second one turns around, it's not like twice as hard. It's like it's an exponential type thing. So, it's 3.5, 4 times as hard as just having one, because you've got an infant routine, which is just not a routine. Basically, it changes every 3 weeks. So my intent was to take a little bit of time off from all this casting kind of stuff and Counter Strike and content in general, until my life kind of settled down a little bit again after having another baby, and it yeah, that never
Never
came
really came
back.
back.
Yeah,
No.
so yeah,
I never really knew that you had at some point sort of intended to perhaps come back. So, we've
yeah,
spoken about the reasons why you might have stopped, but what were the reasons that you didn't come back? I know you were still in Newcastle for a little while,
yeah.
so the opportunity could have potentially been there, but did you feel like maybe other people had filled that void, or it was too difficult to get back into, or did you just decide sometime along the track that you didn't want to anymore?
Yeah, there's probably a couple of reasons in there as well. I don't really specifically remember the circumstances around it, but I remember leaving CGPL, and this isn't CG's fault, or Steve Cyanide at the time, who was running CGs or anything like that. But I remember leaving that event, feeling a little. I can't quite think of it. You're like empty about things, or just like not that enthused about how that kind of event played out for some reason.
Mm.
And so that kind of, it was like a little sour note for some reason. That was probably the only time that I had that in Counter Strike as well. So looking back on it with a bit more hindsight later on, it's probably a silly thing to kind of focus on. And then with a kid, and then basically trying to find that motivation to get started content again, and then being able to organize my life, um, and the routine of having, I was kind of intending to do 6 months off and then come back, but 6 months isn't enough time with a baby. At 6 months, their routine's still ridiculous, and you've got a second child to deal with, and still have to work, and increasing responsibilities and that kind of stuff at work as well. So I had intended to, and then I just kind of really never got the motivation to get back into it properly. Um, I kind of waned on Twitter for a while because that's easy to kind of keep up with things, and that's basically all it kind of devolved to. Really, was just kind of looking at Twitter, and then it got from occasionally tweeting analytical type stuff to just occasionally tweeting Counter Strike related things to just using Twitter
And
and
6 months
looking at
is
Counter Strike.
quite a long time when it comes to esports as well.
Esports, yes, as well, yeah. So, and other people, coming in and stepping into the fray never bother me all that much. The only kind of person I would say who is fairly similar in style to me would be Pilly.
Mm.
He's the only person really that I can think of over this period of time who has probably taken more, or not exactly what I've done, but the style of what I do and the analytical things that he brings, and the very smart dude that he clearly is, and the way he can read the game was kind of probably the most similar to what I've done. But I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't have Pilly and myself on a cast, as long as you've got someone to balance our styles as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's quite interesting that I ended up casting with him as well. I think that when I look for someone as a co-commentator or a duo, there's obviously quite a specific type of person that I
you need your mic star.
Tended to angle for. Yeah, I needed my mic star. I obviously had Sniper for quite a while, which was
Yeah.
a similar role as well. And then we've got Pilly now as well. So
But Sniper is more likely to say some outlandish things than Pilly or I is, I feel. Yeah.
Yes.
And I guess as well, it's like the why we work so well and why was because I feel like our styles kind of complement each other as well. I mean, clearly when we started off, you didn't know that much about Counter Strike. You had learned quite a bit, and I'm hoping that you learnt stuff off me as we kind of went along. But I knew a lot about the game, but I wasn't particularly great with play-by-play casting, which is something that I did work at, and throwing and things like those technical aspects for you, so that you could do your thing, because you were clearly pretty good at bringing the hype, whereas bringing the hype isn't my thing.
Yep.
So, and that's fine, right? And this is where you kind of get that you were speaking about. It's like polarizing of sorts. There's people like my style or they don't, or they appreciate it or they don't. And it's just because I don't necessarily bring the bright attention kind of stuff that a lot of people do when it comes to commentating. But there's a place for everyone, I feel, and Pilly's been very successful as well. So it's clearly workable as long as you have a good balance, which with someone like you associated with a cast, and then you can get that kind of balance.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I personally am that kind of person that has that appreciation for your style and for Pilly's style, for example, because again, I've always sort of sought out that kind of a person on broadcasts that I've worked, because I just feel like maybe that's something that, I don't know, people don't tend to appreciate quite as much as they perhaps should. But either way, it is what it is. Yeah,
and Thorin talks about this a lot on his Twitter as well. People who generate content that is what, and he often talks about it in the context of the CSGO subreddit or the LoL subreddit, that people ask for analytical content and, in-depth discussions and things like that. But then when there's other people out there bringing that content, people don't consume it. It's not the most popular style of content, which isn't to say that you can't bring aspects to that, to broadcasts. And I think Sponge does this pretty well. He runs the balance of raw nerding on Counter Strike and being super entertaining at the same time. He runs that balance really well, and he's clearly more energetic or whatever in some ways, and he plays a character to a large degree as well, which is fine, but that's just not something I particularly want to do. But you can work it in, but you can't go full demo mode all the time, which is something that I tried to not do at times when we were casting as well. So
okay, so let's imagine you're in like this alternate reality, for example, where you might have continued with your Counter-Strike commentary career had that been as a secondary thing, or if, God forbid, some reason you ended up doing it as a full-time thing. Who knows? Where do you think you would be at? Do you think that you might have been someone that would have done the likes of IEM Sydney's, like, for example, myself and Sniper and Pilly and these kinds of guys that you're talking about? Do you think you would have been on that level and you'd have been getting international work and that kind of thing?
Well, I think if you and I continue to work as a duo, I think we would have continued to improve, and certainly if we would have been in the mix for that kind of stuff, and I think we potentially would have kind of done that level as well. So yeah, an alternate reality where I would have been able to continue. I would have liked to think I would have got or continued to stay involved and try and make it to that kind of level. Um, yeah. Uh,
How many
but
legs? How many legs would your career have had realistically? Like, did you ever see like a point where you might have just gotten bored of it, sort of thing?
At the time, no. Um, I clearly I probably have had the opportunity to, and I've looked at getting back into doing some content here and there. And I do get involved. It's a matter of getting kind of started with it for a large degree. I've tried a couple of times and hasn't really worked out for me. And it's kind of a reflection about where I am as well outside of Counter Strike. And yeah, I just never really reignited that spark so much. So I haven't really pursued it. And, I've got some different interests now as well that chew up a bit of time. So it's kind of managing that with family. But, if things were a bit different and I was still involved, then yeah, I would have liked to have continued, but um, I could never make a full cut, like a full, I don't think I would be able to go full time, which is a problem or was not a problem, but it was something that was going to restrict me certainly in terms of some of the broadcast requirements that ESL Australia wanted. I remember them wanting the people who were going to do ESL AUNZ Champs season 1 or 2, I think it might have been, or something like that. I remember that, someone saying that we want the person who was on the broadcast during the week, like every week, and then to do finals. We don't want to have this mishmash of people coming in and then you bring people in finals,
Yeah.
and I couldn't commit to that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, and there isn't a reality from that point in time, 2016, if I wasn't going to drop out, there wasn't a point where I'd be able to stop what I was doing in my professional career to be able to switch over to esports entirely. So I would have been limited. But I think you and I worked quite well as a duo, and we would have had some longevity in CS, I think.
Yeah, I think so as well. So I guess for you, really, the TLDR for your esports career as a caster, at least, was it was kind of a case of the wrong place at the wrong time, right? The scene was maybe 5 years too late, and you were like 5 years too early.
You're being very generous.
I'm a nice guy.
Yeah, I would say that if you took Mike from 2003, 2004 era, where I was first getting into creating content, and you placed that Mike into, let's say, the very start of CSGO, and, I would have been 20-ish, your kind of age at the time in 2012, 13, 14, then I'd probably be, you and I would be sitting on a broadcast, tomorrow or something like that. Yeah. That's a completely different reality. It'd be a fun one. It's a fun one to think about. But the decisions I made, when I was late 2000s to kind of shore up my life and secure my future and that kind of stuff have just completely prohibited being able to do this. Fully commit to this kind of stuff, and that's completely cool as well. So, yeah, I have a really good job. I really enjoy. So, yeah. There's no real regrets.
Too responsible for your own good, it seems like, really.
Yeah, well, you get a family and, you
Priorities
feel
change.
obliged to look after them and that kind of stuff.
All right. Well, what do you think about esports right now? Like, I know you're not so involved these days, but
Yeah.
what's your take on it? Has it leveled up to the level that you sort of thought it would? Has it maybe lagged a little bit behind, or what are your thoughts?
If I think about where we were sitting, let's take that event in 2005 at the WCG, the Samsung event. We were at the Gold Coast Convention Centre. We had a small crowd, but a crowd nonetheless, and like a proper screen and a stage and all that kind of stuff. Getting out, and then let's say it'd be close to 10 years later, 9 years later, doing an ACL Sydney, which is not quite at the scale that was. A little bit smaller. It's a similar kind of deal, but yeah, it was very stagnant in terms of growth in that kind of decade period, and we saw that coming in 2006, 2007, when I was still just involved in the scene. In terms of the sponsorship involvement and that kind of stuff was very hard to get at the time, and I'm sure that the people in the scene understand the business people in the scene understand how hard it is to get sponsors. People know about esports now a lot more than they used to. I probably would have predicted the growth to be a little bit better over that first 10-year period from 2005 to 2015. We kind of inched our way forward, I think, and stagnated a bit in Australia. And that's a geographic problem as well in terms of, the pure number of people you can market to and get return on investment, that kind of stuff. We're just limited where we are. We've seen some really cool stuff over the last 5 years. IEM, it's probably, I guess we play catch up when IEM rocked into town. IEM and MEO have played catch up for probably that stagnation. We're probably about where we should be. We just haven't done it in any kind of linear fashion. And now things have just gone pear-shaped with COVID, so that's all cool.
That's life, yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where we are in the present day. So I think we might leave it there, Mike. That's been In Retrospect with M1kest4r. So where can we find you, M1kest4r, and where can people catch up with you?
Just on my Twitter. Yeah, the handle's right there on the screen. If people, have questions about how the old esports days were and that kind of stuff, and I'm happy to answer them when I get to them on Twitter. But yeah, that's kind of basically it, really. I don't have any immediate plans to get into it. This is a fun little venture, trip down memory lane. So yeah, I do remember a lot more about various events and things back in the day in terms of 1.6 and Source and that kind of stuff. But there's not that many people who are interested, and the people who are interested were probably there at the time.
Yeah, I'm sure if there is anyone, they'll hit you up. I assume that's your final thoughts. There's nothing else really to add.
No. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, that's going to be that. Thanks, Mike, for joining me on In Retrospect. Obviously, you can find me at Elfish Guy on Twitter. I'm on Twitch, whatever. You're probably watching this on YouTube. Make sure you give us a like. Make sure you give us a sub. Make sure you comment. Let us know all those good things and help the algorithm out. And, I hope to see you in the next episode of In Retrospect. Wasting time.